BBC Learning English. Everyday English, every day.
Hello and welcome to Entertainment. I'm William Kramer. Here at bbclearningenglish.com we're running a short season of programmes marking the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade. This significant anniversary hasn't been ignored by Hollywood either. A new film, Amazing Grace, tells the story of the campaign in the British Parliament for an end to the slave trade. It stars Ioan Gruffudd as William Wilberforce, the British politician who is traditionally seen as largely responsible for stopping the slave trade. I say traditionally because Wilberforce's role in the campaign for abolition is now quite controversial. Some historians say that by always looking at British politicians, we ignore the actions of the slaves themselves. So is it okay for Amazing Grace to focus on white politicians, or should it pay more attention to the lives of the black slaves? Let's listen now to the film critic Mark Kermode. As you listen, try to answer this question. How is the story in Amazing Grace told?
It's not a story told from the perspective of the slaves. It's told from the perspectives of the white Englishmen who are debating the nature of slavery.
Listen again.
It's not a story told from the perspective of the slaves. It's told from the perspectives of the white Englishmen who are debating the nature of slavery.
Mark says that Amazing Grace is told from the perspective of white Englishmen and not slaves. Perspective. This generally means a way of thinking or a general view on life. We use it for expressing our opinions about things. For example, you might say, from my perspective, learning English is a very important skill. This means it is your opinion, your view of the issue. Note the use of from your perspective, from my perspective, from a scientific perspective, from a historical perspective. Now, if you want to say what the issue is that you're talking about, you need to say on. For example, his perspective on international affairs is really interesting. When we talk about perspective in films or books, we're talking about the view on life of the characters in the film, their opinions, experiences, and feelings. Mark Kermode says that the story of Amazing Grace is told from the perspective of white Englishmen, not slaves. So it's their opinions and experiences which are highlighted in the film. Let's listen to Mark again. This time, see if you can hear a word which means the same as perspective.
It's very easy to criticise a movie for what it isn't, and there's a big thing at the moment about criticising movies about issues movies that are seen from the viewpoint of of white men. Another example would be Blood Diamond, for example.
Viewpoint means the same as perspective, and we use it in much the same way. Viewpoint is a shortened form of a very common phrase, point of view. Like perspective and viewpoint, we use point of view to talk about the experiences of characters in books and films, and also to express opinions. For example, you can talk about a feminist point of view or a scientific point of view, as well as your own point of view.
BBC Learningenglish.com.
So Mark Kermode says that recently there's been quite a lot of criticism of films like Amazing Grace and Blood Diamond, told from the viewpoint of white men. But what's his point of view on this issue?
Just because you're making a movie work for a target audience, it's clearly a movie meant to have the widest possible audience, and it's the kind of film which, if you were sort of trying to get a school class to talk about the issues of slavery and the slave trade, it's almost like a teaching tool kind of film. It does not portray the horrors of the slave trade.
Mark says that Amazing Grace is a movie meant to have the widest possible audience. The audience of a film is the people who go to watch the film. You can characterise your audience by saying a young audience, an old audience, an educated audience, and so on. If we say a wide audience, we mean that people of all ages and backgrounds will want to go and see it. Mark is saying that the makers of Amazing Grace are aiming for a very wide audience, which means that they want young people to see the film and to talk about slavery, maybe in school. This is what Mark calls the target audience of the film. A target audience is the audience which you want to come and see your film, or that you want to read your book or magazine. Listen again.
Just because you're making a movie work for a target audience, it's clearly a movie meant to have the widest possible audience, and it's the kind of film which, if you were sort of trying to get a school class to talk about the issues of slavery and the slave trade, it's almost like a teaching tool kind of film. It does not portray the horrors of the slave trade.
So, because the target audience of Amazing Grace includes some young people, Mark says that they couldn't show the horrors of the slave trade. So Mark's viewpoint is that the film's perspective is okay because it was made for a very wide audience. If you go to the entertainment webpage on bbclearningenglish.com, you can hear these words again, download this programme, and also hear our other programmes commemorating the abolition of the slave trade. Goodbye.
BBC Learning English. Everyday English, every day.